It started with silence, no alarms, no warnings, just a shift in the sky over Lake Erie, like the clouds themselves had paused to stare. Then came the shadows, massive, gleaming, impossible ships hovering silently over Detroit like the judgment of forgotten gods. The world had known about extraterrestrial life for all of 5 minutes, and now it was under siege. The Zorval Dominion, a name that would soon be cursed in every language on Earth, had arrived not with diplomats, but with warships. Their plan was simple: shock and awe, hit the major population centers, broadcast surrender demands, and wait for humanity to fold, and it worked, almost everywhere, but not here, not in Detroit. When the first Dominion landing craft touched down near the crumbling remains of an old auto plant on the east side, they expected to find scattered civilians and no military resistance. What they didn't know was that Detroit hadn't needed an army for decades. It had been at war with itself, poverty, corruption, crime, abandonment, and it had survived. Every soul still living in Detroit was already a soldier in some form or another. The Zorval thought Earth's nations would break along political lines, that the weak would die and the strong would scatter. But in Detroit, something else happened, something they never expected. A kid on a dirt bike tossed a Molotov cocktail into the open hatch of the first alien scout walker. It exploded with a violent pop, setting off screams from the Dominion foot soldiers as their suits melted from the inside. That was the first kill. Before the ship's automated cannons could turn to retaliate, someone, no one knows who, drove a rusted Ford pickup truck, Jury, rigged with an old snowplow and dynamite sticks, straight into the landing ramp. The explosion wasn't clean, but it was loud, it was local, it was personal. Within hours, rooftops came alive with snipers using double Utura rifles passed down from grandfathers. Mechanics turned abandoned garages into weapons bays. Drones used for filming street races became kamikaze scouts. Former factory workers, jobless for decades, remembered how to assemble things. Only now they were assembling death. What the Dominion mistook for chaos was strategy hidden beneath scars. These people didn't run. They got loud, and they got organized. Mayor Thompson, a former Marine with a prosthetic leg and a zero tolerance policy for alien bullshit, declared martial law. He sent messages by ham radio, drone drops, and burning car signs. Hold your block, bleed them here. The old neighborhoods, some half forgotten, many barely functioning, locked down into zones. Grandmas handed out bullets like cookies. Churches became first, stayed tense. Schools taught improvised warfare between algebra classes. The aliens, confused by resistance that didn't follow any military doctrine, tried to regroup, but they never understood the fire they had landed in. For them, war was clean, tactical, elegant. For Detroit, war was dirty, vengeful, and fought in potholes and shadows. The Dominion's command ship over the Great Lakes sent a distress signal back to its fleet. One sentence translated into human language by military satellites. This hive resists extermination. They called us a hive. They thought we were insects, but they were wrong. We were fire ants with engine grease in our veins and nothing left to lose. That first night in Detroit changed everything. The Dominion came expecting surrender. Instead, they got a spark, and as history would later record, that spark would light the fire that burned across the stars. The Zorval Dominion expected a quick and brutal conquest, not a war of attrition fought block by block. After Detroit's unexpected stand, other cities began to stir, but it wasn't the governments that led the way, it was the people. Something ancient, something primal had awakened in humanity. The Dominion didn't realize that Earth had been forged in fire. From tribal skirmishes to world wars, from civil unrest to revolutions, War was humanity's oldest craft, and now a new generation was picking up where the last had left off, with vengeance and creativity. The aliens made a tactical error by sending patrols into the ruins of Highland Park. That district hadn't seen government support in decades, but it had people, resilient, sharp, angry people. Former street racers began modifying cars into Mad Max-style assault vehicles. Old junkyards became gold mines of alien, shredding potential. A mechanic known only as Mama V began refitting mufflers into rocket launchers and welding alien scrap into homemade armor. Her garage earned the name The Forge. Dominion drones that dared to fly overhead were shot down with modified nail guns and slingshots rigged to tear through composite armor. Meanwhile, in the suburbs of Metro Detroit, software engineers and hackers began cracking into the Zorval communications arrays. They couldn't speak the language fluently, but they understood signals. Within days, they'd learned how to jam transmissions, feed false data, and, most hilariously, route Dominion broadcasts into public TV, playing reruns of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. What began as psychological warfare became full-blown rebellion when a group of rogue gamers used a VR setup to hijack one of the Dominion's quadrupedal tanks and walk it off a freeway overpass, streaming the whole thing. By week 2, the Zorval ships hovering above Detroit were under siege from below. The Dominion's elite enforcer unit, the Erkari, descended from their battle cruiser to end the resistance once and for all. Clad in shimmering armor and bristling with plasma weaponry, they strode into the city like demigods. What they didn't expect was that someone had lured them straight into a steel trap, literally. Using stolen Dominion tech, repurposed auto factory conveyor belts, and some good old-fashioned explosives, the defenders of Detroit built an ambush inside the cavernous remains of the Packard plant. As the Erkari entered, the floor collapsed beneath them. They fell into a pit swarming with homemade drones, thermite bombs, and human fury. Only 2 crawled out. They were never seen again. That battle was streamed live. Across the world, people watched as a city that had once been written off as broken now stood as the beating heart of the resistance. Small towns in Poland started barricading roads with tractors. Rural villages in India repurposed water pumps to flood alien encampments. Inner city youth in Brazil began building EMP devices with stolen copper wire and car batteries. Detroit had done more than survive. It had taught humanity how to fight smart, dirty, and loud. The Zorval Dominion, stunned by the viral spread of Earth's resistance, regrouped for a global counterattack. But what they couldn't understand, was that humanity had stopped being afraid. For the first time in known galactic history, an invading empire had to consider retreat, not because of superior weapons, not because of political negotiations, but because one city refused to die and dared the rest of the planet to do the same. The Zorval Dominion's command ship, Vakarthal, hovered in low orbit, casting a cold shadow over half of North America. Inside its war chambers, confusion reigned. The Earth was supposed to be subdued in 72 hours. That was protocol. That was how every invasion had gone for centuries, but Earth, particularly Detroit, was rewriting the rulebook. General Krathson, the supreme strategist of the Dominion, stared at the battle reports like they were written in madness. Plasma convoys annihilated by modified school buses. Tactical dropships disabled by Garage. Built EMP. A Dominion outpost overrun because someone set loose a pack of wild dogs with armor plating. But nothing rattled the Dominion like the humans' ability to adapt on the fly. Zorval weapons were powerful but predictable. The humans didn't follow that logic. They didn't fight to win battles. They fought to make a statement. After the Erkari's failure in the ruins of Detroit, Earth's resistance exploded. Instead of cowing other cities into submission, the display emboldened them. Los Angeles set its smog-choked skies on fire with mirrored solar death rays built from old satellite dishes. A biker gang in Perth rode straight through a Zorval patrol convoy strapped with homemade flamethrowers and blasting highway to hell from their speakers. The tipping point came from an unlikely place, the internet. Detroit had become the face of resistance, and their fighters quickly learned how to wield information like a sword. Live streams of battles went viral. Tutorials were created on how to convert a microwave into a pulse disruptor. One teenage girl in Chicago uploaded a 30-second video on how to override Zorval Scout drones with a hacked Xbox controller. It was downloaded 4 million times in one day. Then came the unthinkable. Earth's fractured militaries began to coordinate, not from government orders, but from underground networks forged through gaming forums, encrypted chats, and open source wikis. Former rival nations traded schematics. DIY warriors in Detroit shared videos with resistance fighters in Lagos, who in turn taught miners in Chile how to destabilize Dominion gravity wells with explosives crafted from fertilizer and mining equipment. The humans weren't just surviving, they were evolving. Meanwhile, aboard the Vakarthol, cracks were forming in the Dominion's military doctrine. Zorval soldiers were genetically bred to follow orders. They weren't built for improvisation or prolonged resistance, facing an enemy that didn't obey their own logic, who laughed in the face of death, made memes of their martyrs, and treated guerrilla warfare like an art form, was unraveling their centuries-old supremacy. Entire battalions began refusing to deploy into red zones, which now included most of urban Earth, but the Dominion made one last play, a full-scale orbital strike on Detroit. A weapon called the Sky Maw, capable of reducing cities to molten craters, was primed. The target locked, countdown initiated, and then it didn't fire because someone hacked it. The Dominion never discovered who it was. Rumors ranged from an underground tech collective to a rogue AI built in a Silicon Valley basement. But the feed that hijacked their command deck showed one thing: a middle-aged woman in a grease-stained hoodie flipping them off while Lose Yourself by Eminem played in the background. The missile turned 180 degrees and detonated in space, taking out 2 other Zorval warships docked nearby. That moment went down in history as the turn, the day when an empire realized they were not just losing a planet, they were losing control of the narrative. Humanity had become more than a problem. It had become a plague of defiance, a viral infection of rebellion. And at the center of it all, Detroit stood not as a city of ruin, but as the crucible where the fate of Earth began to change. The Zorval Dominion had vastly underestimated one key element of Earth's defenses: its culture of relentless, unfiltered creativity under pressure. By the time the Dominion's tactical board reviewed the failure of the Sky Maw strike, it was already too late. The act of defiance from Detroit had triggered what military historians would later refer to as the global snapback. Not because it was a structured counteroffensive, but because of how unpredictably coordinated humanity became without anyone officially being in charge. Around the world, the human spirit ignited. In Tokyo, underground engineers turned an abandoned subway line into a kinetic railgun, launching discarded automobiles at incoming Zorval drop pods. In Brazil, samba dancers used rhythmic street parades as smokescreens for ambushes. Entire Dominion squads disappeared beneath the confetti. In Siberia, frost-hardened hunters repurposed laser fencing into brutal snow traps, slicing through Dominion armor like paper. And then there was Detroit, still standing, still fighting, and now broadcasting daily under the pirate signal known as WRATH, Worldwide Resistance and Tactical Hacking. What began as an anonymous stream from a ruined radio tower evolved into a global phenomenon. Resistance fighters called in from bunkers, forest encampments, and shattered city blocks to share victories, losses, tactics, and hope. Every broadcast opened with the same chilling words, "This is Earth. We are not dead, and we are not done." The psychological impact on the Zorval forces was catastrophic. Their doctrine had no concept of spirit in warfare, no clause in their manuals for handling an enemy that refused to break, even when outnumbered and technologically outgunned. Elite Dominion mind breakers, trained to dismantle prisoner morale, found themselves unnerved by the resilience of captured humans. One commander recorded an interrogation where a human POW, despite being restrained, mocked the officer by humming "Another One Bites the Dust," and then proceeded to quote "Die Hard" as their final words when executed. But Earth wasn't merely resisting, it was learning fast. Downed Dominion ships were cannibalized for parts. Human engineers engineered energy weapons using scrap, solder, and sheer lunacy. Entire laboratories sprung up in basements, garages, and even fast food restaurants. The Zorval called it chaotic ingenuity. The humans called it figuring shit out. And then came the decisive shift. In New Zealand, a rogue tech collective called the Black Signal managed to reprogram a captured Dominion fleet beacon. Instead of calling reinforcements, it broadcast Earth's location as a dead zone, a planet undergoing viral collapse, uninhabitable for centuries. The signal rippled through the Dominion's long-range scouts, creating a false narrative that Earth had fallen to a bio-contagion. Reinforcements were delayed, communications scrambled, Earth bought itself time. It was in this fragile window that humanity struck back. The Resistance launched Project Goliath, a desperate plan to retrofit a dormant orbital platform from the 1980s Cold War era with Dominion ion tech. Half the modules didn't work. The oxygen system was patched with duct tape, but when it finally powered on, it launched a devastating EMP blast across low orbit, disabling 40% of the Dominion fleet around Earth. In that moment, everything changed. The Zorval fleet recoiled. For the first time, the invaders were forced into retreat, not a strategic withdrawal, an actual, uncoordinated, panicked scatter. Earth was no longer viewed as a soft conquest. It was a breeding ground for viral rebellion, and the Dominion wanted out. As the last of their battleships limped out of orbit, the human resistance, what remained of it, stood on scorched soil and smoked with pride. Cities were ash, but morale was steel. Civilization was in ruins, but the spirit of Earth was incandescent. And it all started with the city they tried to erase, with the people they called primitives. With a planet that refused to be broken, humanity had not just survived, it had won the first war. Victory on Earth was not the end, it was the ignition point. Humanity, scarred but unbowed, looked to the heavens not with fear, but with fury. They had defended their home against a galactic empire, and now they wanted answers, retaliation, justice. The Zorval Dominion had made a grave mistake by thinking Earth was just a battleground. It was a forge, and the fire had only just begun. It started with Detroit again, in a repurposed foundry once used to manufacture truck engines. A coalition of engineers, scientists, and combat veterans turned the remains of downed Dominion ships into something new. They called her the Hammerhead, a starship built entirely from salvaged Zorval tech and human defiance. She wasn't pretty. Jagged plating, asymmetrical design, a mess of welded chaos. But she flew, and she hit like hell. Within weeks, the Hammerhead launched from the salt flats of Utah, punching through Earth's atmosphere with a roar that shook the clouds. The launch wasn't just a test flight. It was a statement. Humanity wasn't waiting for the next invasion. They were going to take the fight to the Dominion. Other vessels followed. Brazil's Sombra Estelar, Germany's Himmelsjäger, Japan's Usha no Tsubasa. Each ship different, each crew forged in the fires of resistance. What they lacked in polish, they made up for in creativity and sheer audacity. Humanity's first fleet wasn't a military armada. It was a pirate swarm, unpredictable, unsanctioned, and utterly terrifying to their enemies. The first target was a Dominion relay station orbiting the uninhabited moon of Jorvac Roman 9. Meant to be a minor skirmish, it turned into a turning point. The Hammerhead led the charge, dodging plasma fire and jamming communications before unleashing a barrage of repurposed Dominion railguns. The battle lasted only minutes, the relay was destroyed, and in its place humans left a crude but clear message, Bray, painted across a captured Dominion beacon in blocky Terran script. You started this, we finish, ID. What the Dominion didn't understand, and couldn't, was that humans didn't fight like a typical species. They weren't bound by a single doctrine or culture. Every planet they visited, every Dominion outpost they burned down, the humans adapted, changed, and grew bolder. They stole alien languages and made them their own. They twisted enemy weapons into experimental tech. Every victory became fuel for the next, but they didn't conquer, they liberated. In the Slave, mines of Zelthakar, humans freed thousands of imprisoned species, beings who had lived under Dominion rule for generations. Some were too broken to comprehend what was happening. Others wept when offered a weapon. The humans didn't demand allegiance. They gave freedom, and for many, that was enough. Word spread faster than any Dominion censor could suppress. A new name echoed through the stars, whispered in awe and fear. Terrans. Not humans, not Earthlings, just Terrans, those who came from a world that survived the impossible and kept moving forward. To some, they were heroes, to others, monsters. To the Dominion, they were a plague, predictable, unstoppable, unrelenting. One story circulated in hushed voices across the fringe colonies. A Dominion warlord's fortress leveled in under an hour by a squad of Terrans riding scrap, built hoverbikes and blasting Earth music through orbital speakers. As the fortress burned, a single phrase played on repeat, born to run. In just under a year, humanity had gone from refugees in their own cities to an interstellar resistance force, feared by an empire that had ruled for millennia. Their weapons were held together with duct tape and spite. Their strategies changed every day, but their mission never wavered. Never again would Earth kneel. Never again would they be caught unaware. And anyone who threatened the freedom of another world would hear the roar of engines, the scream of railguns, and the unmistakable war cry of a people who refused extinction. Centuries passed, and the stars remembered. The Dominion fell, not all at once, but piece by piece, shattered by a species that had once been deemed primitive. The Terrans, those strange, tenacious, wildly unpredictable humans, became the stuff of legend. In the aftermath of the war, few could believe the scale of their uprising, the sheer audacity of what they had accomplished. What began in the streets of Detroit echoed into the farthest reaches of the galaxy. But humans didn't stop after victory. They rebuilt, not just themselves, but entire civilizations. Where the Dominion had ruled through fear, humanity offered strength in unity. Where the old empires exploited, the Terrans planted hope. Refugees, outcasts, slaves, and warriors alike found a place among the Terran Federated Alliance. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't peaceful, but it was free. The humans did not seek to lead. Leadership was a burden they had earned, not one they demanded. They simply showed what could be done when you stood for something more than survival. They had faced extinction and answered with innovation. They had met genocide with grit. And now, as elder races looked to them for guidance, they responded as they always had, with wild ideas, chaotic compassion, and an unyielding refusal to quit. One planet Arcturus Prime became the symbol of this new galactic age. It had been a Dominion stronghold, its cities built on the backs of enslaved workers. Now it was home to the Terran Interstellar Accord, a beacon of interspecies diplomacy, its skyline filled with towers built by 1,000 different hands. At the center stood a monument, not to generals, not to politicians, but to the people of Earth, a towering statue shaped like a mechanic holding a wrench in one hand and a child in the other, carved from lunar granite, polished by time. The plaque beneath read, "Detroit stood first. The galaxy stands now." Stories of Earth's final stand became sacred text in alien cultures. On planets that had never known rebellion, freedom fighters painted their faces like human soldiers, played old Terran war songs before going into battle. Detroit's style became not just a tactic, it was a mindset, fast, furious, unpredictable, and never backing down. Even Earth itself became a kind of pilgrimage site. Scarred, resilient, ever-changing, it remained a living symbol of what could rise from the ashes. Tourists stood in the ruins of old Detroit, where the first mechs were built in underground parking garages. Children laughed on Martian schoolyards while learning about General Washington and Resistance Commander Jackson in the same breath. Humanity's history was brutal, beautiful, and deeply flawed, but it was real, and that made it powerful. Of course, some feared the Terrans. Even centuries later, some civilizations whispered of the Fire Planet, a world of warriors born in chaos and tempered in apocalypse. But those who visited Earth found something unexpected, not a fortress, but a home. Music spilled into the streets. People danced, argued, invented, dreamed, and above them, satellites and starships hummed. Constant reminders that humanity had gone to war, not to conquer, but to protect. Humanity never forgot the cost, not the billions lost, nor the silence that once filled their skies, but they turned pain into progress, rage into resilience, and history into hope. In the end, the galaxy didn't just recover from humanity's last stand, it was transformed by it, shaped by it, because when one species stood against annihilation and chose to rise instead, the universe learned a simple truth: you don't poke a sleeping giant, and you sure as hell don't invade during a world war, especially not if Detroit's involved.